yay, man. All out of options, nothing to choose. I pissed out on Netflix, I'm sick of the news. I'd sign up to Sky, but I don't wanna pay. I've been on furlough since May. Never go and listen to a Cockney attitude. Ooh, breaking away. Got to find a better way. I'd rather watch Auf Wiedersehen again and listen to what these old men have to say.
Hello, and welcome back to Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. And Guten Tag.
Guten Tag.
Hello, Joe. It's me, your host, Andy Sledge, and my co-host and partner in crime, Mr. George Bradley.
Yeah.
George, how the devil are you? This is episode 10.
Oh,
This
yes.
is, George, this is
Yeah.
probably the relationship I've ever had. And it's with
Yeah.
how you feeling?
Same. Yeah, we're racking them up, definitely.
Yeah, how's it going in London there for you?
Yeah, it's all right. I've been buying up some new shorts in anticipation of maybe a trip to Spain soon, hopefully.
Oh, really?
I got my final jab on Friday, so
Right.
I'll be all sorted, yeah.
Yeah, so where you thinking of going?
Well, I'll go back to Mahako where my mate lives. It's
Oh,
nice
where's that?
there. It's on the Costas. It's you fly to Almira and it's
All
it's
right.
about an hour drive. It's nice, yeah. It hasn't got, it's more, the only Brits there are like the ones who live there. It's, further down the coast, you've got all the,
The touristy bits, yeah.
yeah, but this is all tapas bars and,
Oh, nice.
it's pretty nice, lovely little place.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, I've actually got tickets booked for Italy in June,
Yeah.
but the closer it gets there, the less likely I think that it's going to happen. I don't know. I mean, like, because I go to watch that nutty game, don't I? Calcio.
Yeah. I've watched the videos.
and yeah, so if the games are on, then I'll go. But if the
Yeah.
game's on, then I don't think I'll go. So, but we shall see, which is a bit of a shame because I've actually got business class tickets booked. So last year, because I had tickets booked for last year, and then obviously it all got cancelled.
Yeah.
And then so instead, I looked, I went, well, how much are the tickets for next year? And like obviously they, this time last year they didn't know what the fuck was going on, so they were like offering business class tickets basically for the price of normal tickets. So I got business class return for 140 quid. And that's like you don't have to pay for anything. You don't have to pay for, you don't have to pay for your bags, you don't have to pay for this, you don't have to pay for that. So it's actually, the 140 quid to go business class was cheaper than any other ticket that I've ever really had. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I was looking at the prices in this map. I mean, my mate's got an apartment there, but it's right on the top of like a hill, and it's this huge walk. I mean, I'm almost dead at the end of the night walking up this hill, and I thought, I'm just going to book. There's a beautiful big hotel like right on the front, and I looked at the prices, and it's next to nothing now. They can't wait to get big. So I said to my mate, I said, I'll come over, but I said, I'm not going to stay at your apartment. I'm going to book into this hotel for a couple of weeks because it's, I don't have that walk up the hill at the end of the night.
Yeah, that can be a killer, and you might find it's even cheaper than getting a taxi.
Yeah. I mean, he's got a little Vespa, but. I mean, okay, I jumped on that a couple of times when he's been slaughtered. Yeah, no,
I was going to say, you driving a moped slaughtered.
Oh,
definitely just sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
So, here we are, episode 10 of Auf Wiedersehen Again.
Yeah.
And as always, if you would like to contact us for any reason whatsoever, so we accept constructive criticism, praise, feedback, or just simple abuse, please do feel free to email us on aufwiedersehenagain@gmail.com. That's Auf Wiedersehen Again at gmail.com. We would please welcome you to follow us on our social media platforms. So Instagram is Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. That's Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. Our Twitter is at Auf Again. That's at Auf Again. Our Facebook page, which we would welcome you to not only like but also share amongst your friends, is Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. So please do search that on Facebook, Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. And our YouTube channel. If you are watching on YouTube, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click that bell, which will alert you to new episodes. But if you're listening on audio only, please, at a suitable time, if you get an opportunity and you have a YouTube account, please do go to YouTube and search Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. And like I say, please do subscribe to the channel and click that bell. But if you are just listening on audio, we are available on all good podcast platforms: Spotify, iTunes, and Google Podcast Breaker, and many, many more. So please do like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And new episodes are released every Friday at 10 a.m. And as always, our theme music is written and performed by the guitar man, Mr. Lee Dosky. And again, as always, we at Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast are sponsored by Top Gun Tattooing of number 12, the Harris Arcade in Reading. Their website, www.topguntattoo.co.uk. Their phone number is 0189 968 667. And we have a couple of fantastic offers for the watchers and listeners of Wiedersehen Again Podcast, and that is our first offer is you are entitled to a 20% discount off any tattoo with Zach from Top Gun Tattooing. So with the code word Hadaway and Shiteman. So all you've got to do is you've got to contact Zach by either calling the shop or by going in person, and you say to Zach that you are a listener of the Auf Wiedersehen Again podcast, you want your 20% discount, and you just tell him to Hadaway and Shiteman, and you will get your 20% discount off your tattoo. But George, that's not all we offer our listeners and readers.
Oh, no.
We offer free tattoos.
Yeah.
I mean, is there any other podcast in the world right now that is offering a free tattoo?
I don't think so, no. I think we might have cornered that, yeah.
We are unique in this area. So if you want a free tattoo, every single listener and reader of our Wiedersehen Again podcast is entitled to a free tattoo. Terms and conditions apply. And the terms and conditions are, we will pay for your tattoo if you get a Neville and Lottie tattoo. So if you get the same tattoo as Neville with the hearts and a Neville and Lottie, we will pay for it. We will come down to Top Gun Tattooing, film it, photograph it, pay for it, and broadcast it across the world. So if you are a massive Auf Wiedersehen Pet fan, a bit mental or pissed out your face, please don't hesitate to get in contact for your free Neville and Lottie tattoo. And don't forget, other free things, we are doing the giveaway. So we are doing the free Jimmy Nail biography. And remember, all you need to do is to follow us on the social media platforms. What do you need to do? You need to go to either Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. On these platforms, there is a post, the giveaway post. You need to like that post. You need to tag 3 friends in the comment section. And what you need to do is you need to either share the post on Facebook, retweet it on Twitter, or share it to your story on Instagram and tag us in the story. So if you do that thing, follow us on social media, like the post, tag your friends and share the post, you will be entered into the draw for the Jimmy Nail autobiography. And it is an amazing epistle, and we recommend that you do so. So with that, we're going to run the competition for the next few weeks. And then we will draw one winner at random, and they will win the Jimmy Nail autobiography, which I myself have read. And so it's got some of my DNA attached to it. So what you can do is, in years to come, when cloning becomes available, you can clone me. There you go. How good's that? You can't. I mean, is there such a better price? Not only are you getting a Jimmy Neal book, but a potential clone of me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing.
That's
so that is
great.
all of the boring stuff. So, George, here we are. Series. I got told off for saying season. Series 1, episode 10.
Yeah.
Last Rites. So, one of the more comedy-filled episodes, I feel. There is a little bit, obviously, there's a little bit of a serious theme going on, but there is a definite comedy angle within this. And there are some guest stars, whatever you want to call them, people that have got a credit in, and there is a wee bit of trivia as well, and there are some locations. The majority of, well, in fact, all of the outside locations are around Bushy and Watford. Now, obviously, again, this is where they're filmed at the studios, which is in Watford, well, near Watford. So yes, they have filmed some locations which are supposed to be like Hemel Hempstead in London and stuff like that. And these locations are in Bushy and Watford. Now, what we will do is there's a few bits of trivia and there's a few things with regards to the guests, but we will talk about those as and when they come up. So the episode opens and we see a very comedy scenario of Barry and Moxie, and they are sunbathing. Now they've got the if you actually hear, they've obviously put some sound effects in place, and one of the sound effects is seagulls. Now, I don't know if you get many seagulls in Dusseldorf or whether that's a true thing, but I would assume that you probably don't. Like Germany's a fairly landlocked country, so yeah, I would assume that seagulls aren't exactly quite prevalent in the middle of Germany, and they're holding like a bit of tinfoil, like Paulie from The Sopranos, aren't they?
That's it. Yeah, that's what I thought exactly. Sopranos. Yeah.
And the music that's playing is sort of very, the seaside-y type music that would play on the carousel, the merry-go-round. The pipey kind of music. But then it turns out that it's the German radio that's playing in the background. And Barry and Moxie are very, very relaxed. And Barry's like, Moxie. And he's like, what? He goes, we should have done this years ago. So they're all, that sets the scene. And it cuts over to Neville and Oz. And Neville is dumbfounded by what's going on. And he says, what they're doing. And Oz is like, tannin that started last weekend when you were away. And Neville says, what on earth? And by the way, just at no point, I'm assuming Neville went back to see Brenda. Him hiding the tattoo at this point. So, anyway, and Neville says, what on earth for? Good for the skin. That's what Barry reckons. And Neville's like, He says, well, you've got to admit that, and Oz says, well, you've got to admit that neither of them has what you would call a flawless complexion. I mean, yes, they are, particularly Moxie. And he says that Barry read in a magazine that the sun's rays are very good for the skin or some crap. And he says they're not going to get much sun around here, are they? And he says, I just want to get, what is it? They just want to get a suntan before they go home.
Prove they've been aboard,
Prove that they've been aboard, which is a very British thing to do, I think.
Got
to get a tan. And Neville says, if you want to prove you've been here, prove you've been here, surely it would be more appropriate to go home with pneumonia. So Neville once again shitting on Dusseldorf. I mean, look, let's have it right. It is a bit of a crap hole, but yes, Neville again being negative Neville. So they cut back in the hut, and Neville walks in. He starts speaking to Dennis. Have you seen those two out there? And Dennis says, the odd couple. And he said they started last Sunday. And Neville says, I wonder why they haven't got buckets and spades. And he said, and Wayne says you would have thought they would have sent us a postcard, but not. So they're all basically having a bit of a light-hearted joke at Barry and Moxie, which is obviously quite a common theme among the hut. And Oz says, if you ask me, them two are completely on the edge of reality. This is Oz. Oz thinks someone's on the edge of reality, so they've got to be pretty fucking mental. And say maybe, and then they start having a bit of a fantasy. Dennis says maybe we should turn this place into a weekend resort. Neville says paint all the huts yellow, call them chalets. Wayne says offer crane rides and turn the dumpers into dodgems. Says the way things are here, it'd be easier to turn this place into a lunatic asylum. Says Oz. Again, Oz talking about other people being a lunatic. And Dennis says, no, Oz, think about it. You could have the deck chair concessions. Nev could do the donkey rides and Wayne could give dance lessons when it rains. Think about it. Stalag by the sea.
By the sea, yeah.
And Wayne, Stalag sur la mer. Sounds a bit more enticing, eh? And Dennis says, it's the sort of place that you want to take somebody that you hate. And Neville says, like Hartlepool.
Yeah.
Not casting aspersions to any of our listeners or viewers from Hartlepool, but yeah, my dad and my granddad were monkey hangers. Did you know that's what they call someone from Hartlepool, George?
No.
Oh, yeah, you go. See, you Cockneys know now. So, in the same way that people from Newcastle are called Geordies, people from Hartlepool are called monkey hangers.
Monkey hangers.
And I'm about to impart some wisdom on you, young George, and this is a true story. So,
not so young, but yeah, go ahead.
many hundreds of years ago, Hartlepool was a very, very busy port. And a lot of ships used to dock into the port for resupplies before they went on their way. And there was a French ship that docked in the port. And somewhere, where this French ship had been around the world, obviously, and somewhere on their travels, they'd picked up a monkey and they kept the monkey on board the ship as like a bit of a mascot. And when the ship docked in Hartlepool, the monkey escaped from the ship and ran into the centre of the town. And obviously, people of Hartlepool had never seen a monkey before. They didn't know what it was. And because the people from Hartlepool at the time were potentially less than average intelligence.
It's a strange little hairy man.
Well, they thought that the monkey they accused the monkey of being a French spy.
As he would, yeah.
And they hung the monkey in the middle of the town in public. And that is a true story, and that is why people from Hartlepool are called monkey hangers.
Right, I'll remember that one.
So, Neville, like I say, Neville casts aspersions on the quality of Hartlepool, something which I would also go along with. So anyway, Oz has got an idea in his head, and he tries to wangle other people into it. So he says, listen, lads, if you want to make a few bob on the side, maybe you should come in with me. Now, this would be the usual point where you explain your fucking, what you're thinking. Dennis says, what do you mean, like? And Wayne says, doing a bit of moonlight or yours. And he says, well, I might have a business proposition. See, I've got this Eric. Can he land for an Eric anyway? Nothing's finalised yet, so I can't say so much, but if you want in, now's the time to speak up. And Wayne straight away clocks what Oz is up to. He basically can see that Oz is after money. And he says, hold on, do you mean speak up or to divvy up, son? And Oz is like, well, both. And Dennis, well within his rights as a potential investor, says, can you tell us what it is? He says, no, I can't. And Neville says, well, how can we be expected to chip in if you won't explain? And Oz says, well, that's the whole point, man, Neville. And he's like, well, it escapes me, Oz. He says, look, the more you speculate, the more coin you get back on the back end. I mean, Oz is just trying to, throw in, like sort of business sounding fucking generic terms there in order to try and make himself sound like he knows what he's talking about. And Dennis quite rightly says, but Oz, we're entitled to know what we're speculating in. He says, well, in due course, Dennis, when I get everything finalised. He says, but for the moment, all I need is your readies
and your trust.
And he turns around like Oz expects to turn around and people to be stood there just willing to hand over money like that. And he turns around and he's like, am I asking too much? Like, and like, they're all like, Dennis is like, bollocks. And Neville's like, oh, how are you? And Wayne's like, nah, you're asking too much. He says, well, suit yourselves. I'll seek investment elsewhere. Stuff you lot. And he's walking out and Dennis says, Osman, at least how are you? Give us a clue. So Oz pokes his head back in the hut. He says, well, it's adult.
The cause offence.
And Dennis goes, adult and liable to cause offence. And Wayne says, well, sounds like Oz to me. So, unperturbed, they cut to the site and Oz is still trying to convince people to hand over money. So he's there.
Investors.
They've got the bricks. And obviously, you know, Oz's job is to motion to the crane operator when's the correct time to put the pallet of bricks down.
Yeah.
But he's also obviously trying to convince Bomber to invest in his plan. So he's like in a bit, whoa, down, up, you know, whatever. And he says to Bomber, look, all I need is cash up front and we'll be quids in. And Bomber says, what kind of business? Oz, big business, expanding markets, guaranteed demand. You know, expanding markets. You wouldn't expect a phrase like that coming out of Oz's mouth. And he says, all we've got to do, buy the gear here, ship it home, and we're quids in. And Bomber asks him, what is it? And he says, well, I don't want you telling the rest, because they never take us seriously, that lot. Bomber, like, entertaining them, but obviously, you know, not. He says, cross me heart. Now, what do you want about? And Oz says, porn. Bomber says, what? Corn? He says, no, man, porn, you know. He says, what are you on about? Are you opening Gateshead's first massage parlor? He says, no, man, videos, man, important videos. And obviously, the crane operator's now got the pallet of bricks more or less in position. And Bomber says, you asking me to handle pornographic videos? Me, the father of 5 children? And Oz says, well, they don't have to watch them. Bombers, are you off your rocker, lad? And at this point, Oz
says, isn't it? You're off your rocker, boyo.
Right. And he says, and at this point, Oz says, well, forget it. And as he says, well, forget it, obviously the crane operator considers this to be the signal to put the bricks down.
Yeah.
And he says, and he just says, I thought with 5 bands you might have needed the extra coin. And Bomber repeats, you're off your bloody rocker, boyo. And then the pallet lands on the scaffold and obviously onto Bomber's foot.
Mm-hmm.
So Oz has caused Bomber a mischief. And they cut to the hospital and Bomber is in a wheelchair.
Well, he has really damaged his foot, hasn't he?
Well, it said that it said on the IMDb, it's in the trivia section.
Yeah.
It said that he had really broken his foot. So they had to write it into the script. It said he'd broken his foot doing a stunt. Now, if you remember, last episode, Bomber wasn't in it.
Yeah.
Or I might even say the episode before. I think he might have been out for 2 episodes. Now, bearing in mind, Pat Roach was a very, very busy actor doing major films and stuff like that. You know, he was in Indiana Jones, he was in James Bond, you know, like he was in, you know, any kind of film that required a big, scary looking dude, you know, generally dressed up in whatever garb and outfit. But so, look, we don't know. I'm speculating here, but I believe that he may well have been away filming something else while they were filming those 2 episodes.
Yeah.
And it says that he broke his foot doing a stunt. Now, obviously, there's no stunts in the episode. So unless it was when he jumped in the, like, was it when he, like, was it 2 episodes ago or 3 episodes ago when he jumped in the, remember when he jumped in the water?
Yeah.
When they were chasing the vandals and all that. Anyway, so look, like I said, it said he was doing a stunt. It said he broke his foot doing a stunt. And I'm going to assume that stunt potentially wasn't on set with Auf Wiedersehen Pet. So he's gone away to do a job. He's come back with a broken foot and they've written it into the script. So he actually did have a broken foot. You are correct there, young George. And so he says, you know, the X-ray shows a couple of broken toes, otherwise just badly bruised. And Neb says, does it still hurt? And Bomber says, hurts like Billy-O. Be okay when I get the cast on. And Dennis says, well, look, if they're not keeping you overnight, we'll hang on and we'll take you back to the hut. And then Oz, for some reason, like, again, you know, it's Oz's fault. And Oz just wants to get away. He's like, well, there's no point in everyone hanging around cluttering up the corridors. So if no one minds, I'll get away. And Bomber's like, you know, obviously, you know, duly upset. He says, the further away, the better, as far as Bomber's concerned. And Oz says, how are you, Bomber? It wasn't my fault. Well, not entirely. He says, yeah. And Dennis says, yes, it was. You weren't paying attention. And Oz tries to blame the German crane operator. He says, what about the Eric on the crane? You can't tell me he was entirely blameless. I'd sue the bollocks off of me, cop for compensation. I'll see you back in the hut. And he says, and Bomber says, well, that's something to look forward. He goes, it's something to look forward to, that I will. Anyway, Dennis says, you know, not to worry, Bomber, we'll see you all right. And Bomber's worried about money. He says, it's the crack Bomber's worried about. Laid off, no crack. And the German nurse says something in German and then says, we go here for leg. And Bomber says, I reckon she means the plaster. And so Neville says, you know, me and Dennis, we'll wait here for you, Bomb. Much appreciated. Won't be too long. And Oz runs back in and he runs and he says, Bomber, remember what we were talking about, the business deal? And Bomber says, he says, remember what we're talking about? And says, the business deal. I remembers it. My foot reminds me. And Oz, you know, as subtle as can be, says, well, now you're going to be laid off for a while. You should reconsider it. So they're in the hospital, and so Bomber goes in to get his foot seen to on his own, and Dennis and Neville are basically, you know, lurking around in the corridor, and they hear a commotion taking place in a side room. And the nurse is, you know, being very, you know, abrupt, and obviously there's an old man there who is, you know, not playing by the rules and annoying the staff. So the nurses and the sisters are like, what you doing, all shouting at him in German. And they're clearly, like, well, as we find out pretty soon, he's hiding something and they're trying to find out what it is.
Yeah.
And the guy speaks up and he says, "Das making worse it gets." And then he starts speaking English. The sister shouts at him in German and he's speaking English, says, "Look, I came to this hospital for some quiet. Why don't you bugger off, man?" So obviously Dennis and Neville, their ears prick up as they would. They hear a northern accent. And he says, "Did you hear that? That old guy's a Brit." Neville says, "Aye, sounds like it." So they rush in. He goes, "Hey, man, what's the matter, son? Just calm down. You know, like just poking their nose in."
Yeah.
He says, "The nurses are here to help you, aren't they?" And then he says to the nurse, he says, "Sorry, I didn't mean to impose. We just realised he was British and thought he might not understand you, like, you know." And the nurse has got the raging up. She's like, "He understands very well. In any language, he is a stubborn old man." And Headley shouts whatever in German. I'm assuming he's telling her to shut up or fuck off or whatever. So then she's trying to get the oxygen mask on, and Dennis just goes, "All right, look, you know, we didn't mean to impose. We just thought you might have wanted a hand." Anyway, so the nurse changes her tune a little bit, and, you know, she says she realizes that it might make her job a little bit easier if Neville and Dennis try and help out, and says, no, that is most kind. Perhaps because you English, he is, and Neville says, "Well, he might calm down." Dennis is like, "He might listen to us." And she says, "Yeah, he has no one, you see, no friends or family." And the sisters put the oxygen mask on, and he says, "Can he talk through with that thing on?" And she says, yeah, if he gets short of breath, just tell me." So Dennis says, "Fair enough." And he says, "What's the panic about?" And the nurse explains, she says, "He hides something. Will you find it?" And it says, "Well, we'll give it a try, won't we?" So the nurse says, "Thank you very much," and obviously, you know, speaks to the other nurses, and they all leave. And so Dennis is like, how are you feeling? And so we find out this chap's called Headley in a second, and he says, how would you feel with this contraption? Dennis is like, well, it's for your own good. You know, they know best, don't they? And Headley's like, aye, so they say. And Neville questions, he says, how come you've ended up here? And he says, because I'm bloody dying, that's how. He says, how have you ended up in the German hospital? He says, I live here. And he's being quite abrupt. And, he's, like I say, he is being a stubborn, cantankerous old git, basically.
Miserable old bugger.
Yeah. And Dennis says, in the city, he says, for the past few years, there was other places I lived before here, mind Mannerheim, Essen. It's the job, you see, the foundries. I can thank them all for this. And Dennis says, what's the matter? He says, I've got chronic bronchitis. And Dennis says, oh, I'm Dennis, by the way, and this is Neville. Pleased to meet you. And he says, aye, Headley Irwin. He says, well, we're pleased to meet you, Headley. And then Neville puts his foot in it a bit. He says, it sounds like you're a Geordie, Headley.
Yeah.
He says, no, I'm bloody not. I'm from Darlington. And it says in the IMDb, in the trivia, it says that even though he claims from Darlington, he's got a Geordie accent. I don't think he does. I think he definitely sounds like he's from Darlington. So I don't know who wrote the trivia for this one, but
so sometimes people can add it themselves, can't they?
Yeah, I think so. But it's whoever wrote that is definitely not a Geordie.
Yeah.
Or like I say, as a Geordie, I'm like he doesn't. He's actually and I believe I looked it up. Did I look it up? Yeah. So Headley, the actor that played Headley's only got a few entries on IMDb.
Yeah, he's hardly done anything, did he?
Yeah, there's not very much information about him, so it doesn't tell you where he's from or anything like that. But yes. Anyway, so Neville's like, yeah, well, we're from just up the road, and then he says, I've not been back to Blighty since 1946. So they question it, how come? He says, not after what they did to me. And he says, who? He says, the British. He says, look, it's a long story. I'll tell you more when I'm more up to it. So Dennis says, listen, would you like us to come back and see you again? And I mean, the sister said you didn't have anybody else. And he's still been a bit like, suit yourself, man. It's not the first time I've been here. It's the last at least. So he's been very morbid. Dennis says, get away, man. You got to trust the staff. What is it that you're hiding there? So Dennis he's had a bit of a dance around the houses and now he's gone in for he says, anyway, Headley's like, don't you start. He says, I'll tell you what, I'll make a deal with you. You cough up whatever it is you're hiding and me and Neville will come back and see you. He says, you're as bad as them buggers out there. He says, how are you, man, Headley? He says, we can bring you fruit or books or whatever you need. He says, I need some slippers. And he sort of mellows a bit, but he goes, I need some slippers and some soap. So he realizes, that Neville and Dennis are going to be nice to him. And he says, right, what you got there? Cough it up, man, whatever it is. So he reaches under his blanket and he pulls out a packet of cigarettes and he hands them to Dennis. And obviously Dennis is like, are you trying to kill yourself, Headley? And he laughs and he says, aye. So this is setting the scene for later on. They've met Headley and they're going to go back and see him. And so they cut. So they cut back to the bar, and it's Moxie and Barry. And it's one of the funniest things. Moxie says, "We look all right, don't we? We look all right at night, don't we? In dimly lit bars." And Barry says, well, we're both fairly attractive men, Mox. Regular features and that. It's just in the skin steaks that we're lacking in it.
Yeah.
And Moxie says, well, if the sun's rays are beneficial, we'd be better off in Saudi Arabia or some other equatorial crap hole instead of here. And Barry reminds, he says, I've got a cousin in Jeddah, but the regime is very strict. And Moxie suggests, we could get a sun lamp, go, he said, go one of them places, sauna and massage, not a hand job dive, somewhere legit, with a receptionist and magazines and that. And Barry says, I'll have a look in the book and see what it says about artificial sunlight. Anyway, so Oz pipes up. He says, give us another one here. Again, calling the barman Adolf. He's like, give us another one here, Adolf. I mean, do you actually think the barman's real name is Adolf? Or do you think that's,
No.
Start to continue? I don't know. And then he said, he offers them a drink. He says, "Do you want to refill there, Moxie? Give them one and all, whatever they're drinking." And Barry, and he's like, "Here it is, sunlight, an artificial sunlight, both of extreme value, is auxiliary healing aids. An auxiliary is underlined." And Moxie's like, "Is that good or bad?" And Barry says, "It's good if used in conjunction with fasting, diet, and manipulation." Well, that sounds very, 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 very much like a dodgy hand job jive, but never mind. So, Oz says, "Do you want this beer or are you fasting?" And Barry says, "Cheers." He says, Moxie says, "If I had the scratch, I'd go to one of those health spas." And Barry says, "There's lots of those in Germany. They're all down south." And Oz has got the wrong idea. He says, "Spas? Is that one of those places where they duck the cripples and they get out their chairs and walk?" And Barry's like, "No, the main thing is to eliminate toxins." Moxie says, "Just the job for us. If only we had the wherefore." And then Oz sees his opportunity for his pitch. He's going to pitch like he's pitching Dragon's Den, but he's pitching Barry and Moxie. And he says, "Are you too skint?" And Moxie says, "Who isn't?" He says, "Well, this could be your lucky day." "How's that?" He says, "Well, I've got this, Eric." And he's got his hands on this product. Now, my idea is if I can raise the readies, I'm going to buy it, ship it back to the UK and make a fortune. And obviously Barry's ears pricked. He says, "Fortune?" He says, "Well, there's more than a round of drinks. I can guarantee you that." And he says, and Moxie says, "And you want us to come in with you, like?" And Oz says, you're not going to get another, I'm not going to be another chance like this. And Moxie says, "What is it?" So Oz, has a wee look around there. And he says, "Well, anyway," cuts back to the hut. And Bomber's there and he says, "I reckon I'm going to have a walking cast in a couple of days and at least I can get back to work then." That's the quickest healing broken toes I've ever had in my life. 2 days in a cast. And they, Wayne says it was Oz's fault. He says, "Mostly." He says, I reckon he should give you half his crack, don't you?" And Dennis says, "Yeah." And Dennis makes him a cup of tea. Says, "Here you go." And Neville starts telling the story of Headley. He says, "Well, we met this funny old bloke down the Crankin," which I'm assuming is the word for hospital. Yeah. And he says, "Quite a character, really." He says, "Oh, yeah." He says, "He's English, but he hates the Brits." And Wayne says, "Was he a patient?" He says, "Aye. Chronic bronchitic." He says, "You'll never guess what he was trying to hide in his bed." Wayne says, "A penthouse? No, 26, untipped. What a character. Aye. Come over from Darlington in 1946, never been back." Wayne says, "You can't hold that against him, can you?" And then Bomber says, where's the rest of our happy old souls?" And Wayne says, "Supposed to have gone down the picture." He says, "I don't know." He says, "Maybe gone down the pictures or something." So Wayne says they've gone down the pictures. Well, they have gone to watch a film. Yeah. But picture of sorts, yeah. They are. So it cuts to like a dark, dingy room, and Oz and Barry and Moxie are sitting on a sofa, and they're clearly watching porn. And like Barry's like got his fingers over his eyes, grimacing, and Oz is smiling from ear to ear. And Barry says, "Is this what you want us to invest in?" And Oz says, "We'll be like importers and distributors, see?" Barry says, "I've never seen anything like it in my life." He goes, "I've told you, didn't I? I told you it was disgusting." And Barry says, "It's depraved. It's despicable." Now, I don't know if you noticed. Did you notice the noises? Well, yes, some, yeah. I mean, well, yeah, but there was chicken noises coming from. Well, I didn't notice that. So yeah, I mean, obviously, it's not just your bog standard porn that they're teaching. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I'm sure that's potentially half a joke on the person that did the sound effects, or it was probably a joke idea. I very much doubt that they're trying to import people fucking chickens or whatever. But well, you don't know. I mean, he did say it's depraved and it's despicable. So so there's chicken noises coming from the video, And Moxie says, it's grotesque. And then there's a little pause and he goes, you can count me
in. Yeah.
So they cut back to the hospital, and Dennis and Neville have made good on their promise to go back and see Headley, and they obviously they start questioning about exactly what happened during the war. And Dennis says, what happened, Headley, back in the war? What started all this off? And Headley says, Staff Sergeant Headley Irwin, 2115709, sir. And then obviously gives it a bit of a cough, and he says, take it easy, it's all right. And Headley says, give us that tin. And Dennis, he says, lie back. He says, this the one? He says, aye, that's it. So he opens the tin. He says, I was in the war, as well. Army of Occupation, stayed on the Yanks, the Ivans, and us. And he starts coughing again. And Neville, obviously, they're having a bit of a weird conversation. So Neville speaks to Dennis, and he's like, what's he talking about? And Dennis explains, says, well, you see, the one the war was over, the British, the Americans, the French, and the Russians, they stayed in Germany like to occupy, to administer it. And Headley was obviously in the British lot. And Headley takes his mask off, and he says, non-fraternization, that's what they called it. You weren't allowed to mix. But a lot of Jerry's worked for us, but you weren't allowed to fraternize socially. Aye, verboten. And he shows them a photograph of a young woman and says she worked in command headquarters on the switchboard, and she spoke the bloody lingo, didn't she? And Dennis says, what did you do that was so terrible? And he says, why? He says, I married her, didn't he? Which, as we turn out, as we find out then, there's he's a bigamist. Yeah. So hold on. Yeah. So it basically we now find out that later on we find out he's a bit of a bigamist. So they go back to the hut, and Bomber is laid up in bed, and Neville is explaining what happened. He says, yeah, the rules are ever so strict. He says, even when all that went to pick their kids up from school, they couldn't talk to the German parents. I think it's terrible, don't you? Bomber's like, it seems a bit unnecessary. The war was over. And then Oz pipes up with his usual xenophobic, he says, seems perfectly logical to me. I mean, if I'd spent 6 years fighting the Krauts, the last thing I want to do is fraternize with them in the local. Yeah. And Neville says, aye, but the war was over, Oz. He says, aye, precious comfort for some, precious comfort for my Uncle Dan, who got a leg blown off in Tripoli. Which, I mean, I know it was all the same war, but, that I can't see what that's got to do with Germany. But he says, I cannot see him wanting to buy drinks for the buggers that blew it off in the first place. And Neville says, the Germans suffered too. Everyone suffered in one way or another. And Bomber asks, so what happened to old Headley then? And Neville explains, says, he married her, didn't he? So they cashiered him, hired him out the army, no pension, nothing. He says, oh, it's tragic when you think about it. And Oz pipes up again. My granny suffered an all, her with a bomb on the way back from the Black Horse. Poor old soul, she'd only nipped out for a milk stout. So, they cut back to the site, and Barry and Oz and Moxie are discussing the business opportunity. And Barry's questioning the morals. It's a moral question you've got to consider, Oz. And Oz's like, what are you talking about, man? They've got these in England, all these so-called respectable middle-class suburbanites every Saturday night stuck round the video with a couple of lager and limes, group sex, and they wouldn't have match of the days kaput. And Mox says, well, they've already got them. Where's our market going to be? And he says, well, they haven't got them like this, He says, they've got porn, fair enough, but not heavy-duty porn like the crowds turn out. I know people back home, sales managers, even Lord Mayors, that would pay well over the odds for what we've got our hands on. Like Oz is like friends with the Lord Mayor, and I mean, you might know a little bit more about this than me, though, George.
Possibly, yeah.
I know, obviously, porn's readily available on the internet right now, and all you got to do is be able to type it in. And I mean, back in the 80s, as a small child, the only potential exposure to pornography I'd ever had was finding it under a bush. You know what I mean? Bush.
Well, I mean, there were various shops in Soho.
I was going to say,
you could go in, yeah.
You as a young teenage boy living near Soho, surely you must have paid a visit to some of the establishments.
Because you go in and then you just say, oh, I want the good stuff, and they'll show you.
Like, was it like under the counter? Was he like looking around like that under the counter back in the day?
But the worst thing I'd done was I bought one of these tapes in the 80s, and I was living at home. And obviously, I was pissed, and I got home and I put it in the front room in the machine, and fell asleep in front of the TV. And my mum come down, and the thing was running full blast, and I'm like,
hopefully not with your trousers around your ankles.
Yeah, well, yeah, they were, yeah.
In flagrante, George. I'm shocked. So anyway, and Oz says one of the greatest lines that I've used, and he says, I'm telling you, he says it's right up there, Strasser.
Yeah.
That's like I always use. I go, that's right, that's my Strasser. And Barry says, I must admit, after what I've seen, you'd be hard pressed to pick up anything like that in the Co-op in Dudley High Street. And he says, what? He says, you're telling me? He says, listen. He says, we've got our hands here as the creme de la creme of filth, He says, this could just be the start. He says, we become world leaders in our field. And anyway, Moxie is obviously quite taken with the idea of watching these. And he says, well, to be fair,
we should have another look.
He says, before we enter into anything of this magnitude, perhaps we should go and have another look.
Have a look, yeah.
So they cut and they're back on the sofa. But this time, Oz has still got his smile, but Barry and Moxie have got like
cocktails. Yeah.
And they're watching the porn, and Barry's no longer got his hand in front of his face. And so there's the German that they're clearly the supplier of the porn video, and he's wanting to be, he seems like a fairly nice, friendly chap there, doesn't he? He's like, so they get better, right? And Barry's like, worse, you mean? And Oz says, worse is better for our needs. And Moxie starts giving them compliment. He says, it's well made, like. And the Porn King says, but of course, good photography, attractive people, a very good story. And Barry's like, good story is important, isn't it? And Oz says, that's what you kind of get in England, man. A good story with plenty of humping. And Barry says, all right. He says, and Moxie's, just making conversation, says, this your sole business? And the Porn King, I've written him down here as Porn King. Don't know what his name is.
He looks familiar anyway. I couldn't place him, but
right. Do you know what? There was someone in the credits later on who I didn't realise who it was, and it's him. I'll talk about it later. So he says, no. Also the books and mail order and such clubs like this for massage and sauna and sun lamp. And when he mentions a sun lamp, well, Barry and Moxie's ears prick right up, don't they? And Moxie says, did you say sun lamp? And the Porn King says, yes. He says, if we are to be in business, you must feel free to take advantage of the premises. And well, this is it for Barry and Moxie. They're like, you've just said the magic words. So not only are they going to be able to make a few quid selling porn videos, they're going to get a free sunbed. So cuts back to the hospital, and it certainly looks like he's getting, Headley's getting worse. And they're sort of, they're poking there, they're looking through the window, and Dennis says, look, he's got his doings on, look, he mustn't be too good. And Neville says, it's rotten to be old, isn't it? At least old and sick on your own. And Dennis says, aye. And then negative Neville once again starts painting the most bleak picture. He says, you see them back home and all, don't you? Queuing up on pension day outside the post office, hunched up against the cold wind, sitting in front of a 1-bar gas fire with a tin of pet food. I mean, where on earth does he think there's old people eating tins of pet food? I don't know. And Dennis says, knock it off, man, Neville. He says, there's no need to be so bloody maudlin. And he says, here, I'm 10 years nearer pension day than you, remember. So that, they're insinuating here that Dennis is 10 years older than Neville. No. And as you rightly said, in real life, Neville's actually older than Dennis, isn't he? Like,
yeah, he's a month older. Yeah,
maybe 6 months or whatever. Yeah, but anyways, so like I said, Dennis is, Kevin Whately clearly had a very boyish look there. And Neville takes a piss. He said, "I'll see you all right, Dennis. You can come over on Sundays and Brenda will do you like a lamb." And the nurse turns up and says, "You come again?" And, he says he's not too good. And he says, "Not today." And he says, well, Neville says, "Can you give him these oranges? Tell him we're popped in." And the nurse says, no, look, go and see him. Just for a little time. And they go in and the nurse says, "Look, your friends are here." And he's, he's clearly, he's a bit delusional maybe. And he says, "Am I still here?" And he says, "Of course you're still here. Where do you think you're going, like?" And he says, "You might well ask." And he says, "What's this then? Had he been going through your things?" And obviously he's been looking through his tin. So, like, to put the affairs in order. And he says, "What's this?" He says, "You can leave that bugger alone. It's got nothing to do with you. Some things are private, And he's, again, he's clearly not well, coughing. He says, "Should we get the sister?" And he says, He's all right now. Just put that tin away." So, and he says, "You ever been to the Dales?" And he says, "Well, before the war." And he says, "He had a farm." And he says, "Who?" And he says, an uncle of ours, before the war, we went by train. They called us townies. We'd never seen cows or fields." And he says, "Was this your sister and you?" He says, "Aye, she was there, me mum or dad. Or Norman got drunk and Dad took his belt off. He says he couldn't sit down. He wanted to cry, but he wouldn't. Not in front of us, not in front of us young'uns." So whoever Norman is, which is like either, he says it must have been a big brother, got pissed and got a lash off his dad's belt. And Neville says, must have been his big brother. And Dennis says, "Aye." He says, "So you had some happy times there, Headley?" And Headley says, "Mabel got bit, the goat bit her." So, he's obviously, he's not hallucinating, but like I say, reminiscing very vividly. And he's clearly a very, very sick old man and clearly not long for this world. And they say, "We better leave them." And Neville says, "Is he all right?" He says, "Aye, if he turned blue if he was bad, Neville. Dennis the doctor." And, he says, "You know how to look after him, don't you, Den?" He says, "Oh, it'll be you who looks after me when I get old, won't you, Nev?" And he says, "I promise you'll want for nothing." And then he starts taking the piss. He says, "I'm not talking too fast for you, my granddad." So again, they cut back, and Oz and Barry and Moxie are in the toilet hut, and they have obviously proceeded now with they've started the ball rolling with their business venture. And Moxie's concerned. He's like, "Where are we going to put the videos for safekeeping?" Like, and Oz is like, "We'll just keep them in the hut." And Barry's like, "It's a bit dodgy, isn't it, Oz?" I mean, like, they don't have a video player in the hut, so I fail to see what's dodgy. And he says, nah. He says, "It'll be all right." And he says, he says, "There's not that many of them." And Moxie says, and Moxie's already thinking ahead. He goes, "Later when we expand." And I was like, "Well, we'll rent a warehouse." So they're in the hut. Bomber's on his bed. Wayne gives Bomber the Walkman, and he says, "Here you go, Bomber, have a bit of that." And Dennis says, "You lucky devil, having a day of sleep." And then the lads, so Oz and Barry and Moxie, they come back from their discussion in the toilet hut. And Neville says, "You better get a move on." And Barry says, "I didn't realise." Says, and Wayne just says, "What you three been up to? You've been in that carsy for hours." And obviously they all start looking a bit guilty, and it's like, nothing. And he says, and Oz says, "Nice and comfortable there, Bomber." He says, "I'd rather be on the site making crack." And Oz just, "Oh, well, these things happen, Aye, because of you, Oz." Anyway, so Oz is trying to stash the videos, and you hear one fall out, and obviously Bomber hears what's going on, and he realizes there's something going astray, and Oz looks dodgy, and Barry and Moxie look dodgy, and they all started like, "Oh, well, we better get off then." And he says, "Yeah, right. Well, we go ta-ra, bomb, ta-ra, bomb, ta-ra." And anyway, so Bomber goes over to Oz's bed space, and he lifts up his mattress, and he finds this video under Oz's mattress, and Bomber just says, "Lesbian lust." So there is the mail call. I mean, bearing in mind as well, I'm amazed how these German videos all appear to have English titles. But
yeah.
Anyway, so it's mail call on the site, and Wayne says my cousin's getting married, and he says, blimey, it's this Saturday. He says, what's the panic? He says, I bet she's in the club. And he's like, Neville's like, where you go? He says, I suppose to. He goes, it'll be a good knees up knowing Keith's dad. As long as it will be, you put out all the stops if he's out of Maidstone, like. So he's obviously a criminal that's, used to going to jail.
Yeah.
And he says, I ought to, Keith. He sort of looks up to me in our family. I'm like a hero figure to him, Nev. So, why? He says, you ain't seen the rest of our family, have you? And Moxie says, oh, there's something's been bothering us. He says, what's that? And he says, the videos, how are we going to get them back to the UK? And I says, we'll take them back ourselves in our kit when we go back. And he says, that's a bit bloody chancy, that, isn't it? He says, what we're doing is illegal. We don't have an import license, and we especially don't have an import license for depraved filth. And I says, look, man, we'll risk it. The profit makes the risk worth it, doesn't it? And I mean, like, I don't know how many videos they buy. It doesn't look that many when they're loading them into the coffin later.
Yeah.
But, if you were to be caught, I mean, what would you think would the penalties have been back in the 80s if you'd have been caught?
I mean, it would be hardcore, which was illegal. I mean,
was it? Is that what?
Yeah. I was strictly, it was illegal, yeah.
Right.
Hardcore porn was illegal.
Yeah, because I mean, again, I remember the first pornographic video that I ever saw. I was like, again, I found it under a bush near, like, me and me mate. It was me and me mate.
I hope you put it back when you finished.
Well, it was me and me mate Ben, and we were out in, like, where I used to live in Newcastle, right? There was, over the road was a hospital called St. Nicholas's Hospital. So a mental hospital, which is a psychiatric unit. And we used to go and play in the grounds around there. And, like, obviously when we were older, we'd be smoking cigarettes and, whatever.
Yeah.
And we fucking found this video under a bush in the grounds of St. Nicholas's Hospital.
Yeah.
So we fucking picked it up, and me and my mate were like, holy fucking shit, like the holy grail. So we've gone back, and I remember a similar thing. So we've gone back and we've put it in, and we're watching it, and my fucking mother's car's pulled up outside. My mother's going to be, bear in mind, my mother is going to be watching this podcast.
Oh.
Yes, mother, me and Ben, Freeth. And so I remember we were watching this porn video. I mean, we must have been fucking 13. And my mother's car's pulled up outside. And I swear, she's got out the car, and obviously I'm pressing the eject button on the video. And like that fucking, that 3 or 4 seconds.
That's it. So you got an eternity.
Takes to eject the video while my mother's walking up the garden path. Jesus Christ, that was the longest 4 seconds of my fucking life. We're like, shit. Anyway, the video comes out, we grab it, and I run upstairs and fucking hide it upstairs in my bedroom. Yes. That was the closest I got. Unfortunately, didn't get caught in flagrante with me trousers around my ankle.
Oh.
It was like a good self.
Yeah.
And anyway, so Moxie points out, he says, look, they always turn us lot over at customs. And he says, especially you with your earring. And I was like, I'll just take it out. And Moxie points out, he says, look, they still bait us. He says, overseas workers. He says, we always are. And then Oz says, what about Barry? He can take them in. Moxie says, Barry smuggling. He says he'll faint if they so much as look at him. And he says, Bear's thinking about, like, he says they've only got to ask him his date of birth, and he'll confess the lot. So they cut back to the hospital, and Bomber's back in the chair, and he's obviously gone to get his walking cast on. And they say, he says, okay, Bomb, we'll shoot off and see Headley, and we'll check back with you later. And Bomb says, all right, I'll put myself in the capable hands of this young Fraulein. And Dennis says, who wouldn't? So they leave Bomber to get his cast off, and they go to Headley's ward, but the bed is empty, and the only thing there's the tin in the envelope. And the sister says, you've come again? They say yes. And Dennis says, have you moved them? And the sister, in very, zero sympathy, in very, very German fashion. And she just says, "I'm sorry, he's died." And Neville's like, "Eh?" And she goes, "Well, it was expected," like as if delivering the news is a chore to her. You know what I mean? And Neville says, "But he was only here yesterday." She says, "Of course, but," and Dennis says, "Yeah, Neville, you know." Anyway, so she goes 1 minute, she picks up the thing and she picks up Headley's belongings, and Dennis says, it was like the sister says, it was expected, it was for the best. And the sister says he has no family in Germany since his wife's death. And then another nurse just comes in and starts fucking shoving them out the way in a very, very, abrupt fashion. And the sister says, "So perhaps you wish to take this." And he says, "Oh, okay, then thanks." And she says he was looking at this before he died. It was the last thing he was holding. And Neville's obviously quite upset. He's like, "I can't believe it." Mm-hmm. And Dennis says, "I shakes up a bit, son, doesn't he?" He says, "I've never experienced death before, not firsthand. I mean, my dad died, but I was just a nipper, and a few relatives I hardly knew." And Dennis says, "Yeah, well, we barely knew him. I mean, did we?" And he says, "No, but we were getting to know him, though, weren't we?" And the next day, just like that. And he says, "Yeah, you see, Neville, I mean, you're a young lad, you go to christenings and weddings." He says, "But once you get a bit older, you start getting used to going to funerals, which is a very, very true thing to say."
Oh, yeah.
And he says, "I suppose so." And he says, "What's those?" And Dennis has got pulled some items out of an envelope, and he says, "Oh, they're old postcards, Lake District, Vale of Evesham. Despite what the old bugger said, I reckon he missed England after all." Mm. And Neville says, "Where will he be buried, Dennis?" And he says, "Well, here, I suppose. I mean, he didn't have anybody else, did he?" And Neville says he had a sister. And he says, "So what?" And Neville, getting all sentimental, he says, "I think he would have wanted to go back home." Mm-hmm. So they're back in the hut, and so Barry, everyone comes to the hut, and Barry's hovering by the door, and he's got a, he's preamble. He's like, "All right, everyone, I'd really be obliged if nobody laughs." And Bomber's like, "That's important." Barry says, "Me face." And Wayne just jokes, he says, "Well, we can't guarantee that." And he says, "Listen, this is serious." And Bomber just says, "Come inside and shut the door, will you?" He says, "I will, but as long as it's strictly understood that nobody laughs." And they all scream and "Shut the door, shut the door." So Barry comes in, and he's got a bright red face, and everyone just breaks down, smiling and laughing. And Barry's like, "It's not a laughing matter, it's all bloody Moxie's fault." And Dennis says, "What did you do, Moxie?" And he says, "Well, we went to this club, sauna, massage parlour, and one of them sun lamps for health purposes." And Barry says, "So I goes under the sun lamp and he promises to wake me." And he says, "I forgot, didn't I? Sorry, I got involved in a film." So Barry's gone under the sun lamp. Moxie's gone to watch another porn movie. Yeah. Moxie's got well wrapped up in the porn and allowed Barry's fucking started burning, and he's burnt to death. And he's like, I forgot. And Bomber says, "It'll wear off in time. You'll probably end up with a great tan." He says, "I don't." He says, "I'll peel, I do." And he says, "Well, make sure you peel over in your bed space," says Wayne. Barry says, "It's not funny. It's very painful." So, back at the hut, and Dennis and Neville are explaining to everyone what happened, and he says, "So what's all that?" They're showing, his Headley's property, and he says it was old Headley's. And Moxie says, "How old is he?" He says, "Oh, he died today." And Moxie and Wayne's face they look a bit sad. And Moxie says, "Poor old sod, whole lifetime in a biscuit tin. I hope I amount to more than that." And Dennis says, "Look, lads, now you're all here. There's something Neville and I wanted to talk over with you." And Oz says, "Oh, aye, what's that?" And he says, "Well, you see, the thing is, we reckon the old fella would have wanted to have gone home." And Bomber says, "I thought he hated Blighty." Dennis says, "Well, he did, Bomber." He says, "But you see, the last things he was looking at was photographs of England." Neville says, "Aye, last time we seen him, he was getting very sentimental, like." Dennis says, "Now, I know the rest of you didn't know the old bloke, and you're not beholden or anything like that, but the thing is, we just don't fancy the idea of him being buried here." She says, "How much would it cost to send the body back?" And Dennis says, well, I don't know. He says, you see, we're all waiting on you, you know. He says, you see how you felt in principle. But I've been to the hospital authorities and they're waiting on us. Bomber sounds fair enough. What family's he got? Now, obviously, you can see now in the corner, Oz is listening in.
Yeah.
So the cogs of Oz's brain, the cogs of Oz's devious brain are clicking over. And Dennis says, you know, we've got the address of his sister. And Wayne says, we'll give her a bell. He says, they're not on the phone. Send her a telegram. And he says, you know, look, that doesn't seem advisable, Barry. She can't be any spring chicken herself. I mean, you know, if she gets bad news like that, the shock could kill her. And Neville now broaches the subject with Wayne. He says, anyway, the point is she only lives in Hemel Hempstead. And he says, and we thought as you're going back for the weekend, Wayne, Dennis says, and he's, no, do me a favour, lads. And Neville says, how are you, man? It's only a short train ride from London. I mean, like, if Wayne's wherever he is, whether he's, you know, it doesn't matter where he is, north, south, east, west, whatever, you know, getting to Hemel Hempstead is a bit of a fucking ball ache. I mean, it's got to be an hour there and an hour back.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to, you know, he's going to be there for at least an hour, and you know, then getting to the house and back's another hour. I mean, that's 6 hours out your day, isn't it? You know, it's a bit of a ball ache. So, and Wayne says, you know, Neville says it's only a short train ride. You can drop in, break the news gently to her, and then you can see Oz has got the idea of Oz is now. His devious mind has worked out that how he can get videos back. He says, maybe give her his things. Dennis says, you know, if she's flush, she'll probably pay the expenses, and if not, we can all chip in. Wayne's like, no, I said, I'm sorry, I'm going back with the wedding, right? I've got the whole weekend mapped out. I'm going to buy me some clothes, get myself strumped, and go and get drunk with the lads. And then Oz, completely out of character, pipes up. Well, that's a despicable attitude, eh? Says, I hope you never die abroad, London. And Wayne's like, what? Hang about? He says, aye. And Wayne's like, you never even knew Moz. He says, aye, well, he was a Brit, wasn't he? And if us Brits can't stick together in a foreign land, who can, eh? I mean, I think this man deserves to be laid to rest on his native soil. And Wayne's like, well, you know, if you feel that strongly about it. He says, well, it's the only decent thing to do, man, isn't it? All right. Wayne's like, all right. I just hope God puts this in me plus column when I snuff it, mate. And Bomber's like, you could do with a few credits, boyo. And Oz says, it's the only decent thing to do, isn't it? And Neville is like, oh, thanks, Oz. And he says, oh, it's nothing. You can do the same for me sometime. Well, not for a while, I hope. And so obviously, and then Oz is heading out to the amenities hut. And Neville's like, wonders will never cease. So Oz and Moxie follows Oz out, and Moxie says, are you a Catholic, Oz? And he says, not that I know of. Why? He says, well, you must be some sort of Christian. He says, I never knew you had such depth of conviction. And Oz laughs. He says, Moxie, man. He says, we've just found war import license, man. So they cut to the admin hut. And they've obviously explained the situation to Herr Ulrich. And Herr Ulrich's sitting there like baffled why they would do this. And he says,
I need a haircut as well. I think his hair's a bit shorter, I think. Or maybe that's the...
Maybe. I did not notice, George. I did not notice. Unfortunately, I'm at the stage in life where I don't really pay much attention.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting there, yeah. And he says, so Herr Ulrich's like, this old man, he was a relative of one of you? And they're like, no. He says, perhaps a close friend of one of you? And they said, not really. He says, but you wish to go to the expense to send the body to be buried in England? And then Oz is like, yeah, Herr Ulrich, there's a principle involved. And Barry said, you know, we thought you might know the procedure, like. And obviously Barry's bright red, and Herr Ulrich's like, are you feeling all right? And he says, fine, thanks. And he says, and Dennis says, look, can you help us out? And Herr Ulrich tells a story. He says, an Irishman has died here before, 2 years. I remember his friends making a collection. How you say it, a whip it out. Whip it out.
And he said, and Dennis says, a whip it round. He said, a whip it around. On this occasion, I helped with the authorities, with the German. Now, he says, with the German law, when you send a body out of the country, it must first be embalmed.
Embalming, yeah.
And Oz says, embalmed. And he says, yes. And Barry says, oh, makes sense. That does. Question of hygiene and sanitation. And like Herr Ulrich's not interested in anything Barry's got to say. Herr Ulrich just, like, Barry's still talking, and Herr Ulrich just talks over the top of him. And he says, the body must be placed in a metal container. This must be sealed before the British consulate. And Dennis is like, why? And he says, well, you see the container, to see that the container has only the body inside. And Dennis cottons on, he says, in case of smugglers, you mean? And Herr Ulrich, of course, he says, of course, this coffin is perfect. Many have tried to hide guns and rifles. And Oz said, well, I can see your point when you're shipping paddies back to Belfast. And he says, well, he's only going as far as Emil Hempstead. And Herr Ulrich, the law is the law. And Neville asked it, is this, and that was obviously, you know, Neville always worried about Murray. Says, this is going to be very expensive, Herr Ulrich. And he says, to England by air, at least 5,000 marks, I think. Yeah. And then you must pay for the coffin too. And Neville says, but if he's in this metal container, and again, Oz, completely out of character. Come on, Nev, we can't send him back in that. What will his people think? Like getting a tin of sardines. Anyway, Dennis says, you know, look, Herr Ulrich, could you look into it? Find out and let us know. And Helric says, yeah, I will try. And as they're walking out, he says to Barry, he says, are you sure you're feeling well? And Barry's like, aye, right as rain. And Helric says, you are very red. Blood pressure, perhaps. You must be careful. If not, you are going home in a metal box. And like the look on Barry's face, like Barry's like, oh yeah, like entertaining the joke and that. And Neville again says, you know, how much is it going to cost? And Barry and Dennis says, it's going to cost a lot of money, Nev. And he says, and Nev says, I cannot see Headley's sister being very well off, not if she can't afford a telephone. And Oz says, how are you, man, Nev? We're not the only Brits on the site. He says, if the paddies can have a whip round, and so can we. So this is the old, you know, the old equivalent of a GoFundMe page. Yeah. You notice, like these days, no one pays for their own shit. Have you noticed? Like as soon as someone fucking dies, like, you know, like people, you know, like before when people used to die, like, okay, they might have a whip round, but like people used to die. Do you know who used to pay for the funeral? The family. And now they're like that. We don't want to pay for it. Can somebody else pay for it? And they fucking put a page up on the internet. Yeah, so this is Oz's version of a GoFundMe page. So they've gone and had the whip round, and they're at the table in the hut and they're counting the money. And they say, you know, what's it come to? And Bomber's like, it's a tidy sum. So Dennis says, he says, it's 742 marks. And at today's rate of exchange, that comes out at £197. So it's just under 4 marks. It's between, like, it's about 3 3/4 marks for a pound. Yeah. And he says, and we've got 86 quid in sterling. So in total, that's £283, which is about the week's wages. As we've discussed, they get about 50 quid a day. So, and Wayne says, not forgetting the 0.34042. And Bomber's like, amazes me that everyone's coughed up, and Nev, you know, Nev's fallen for Oz's charm, hook, line and sinker again. Down to Oz mostly. You know, he went right across town to the multi-story car park, put the squeeze on the Brits there. And he's like, where is he now? Well, he's only down the timber store. He's got Barry and Moxie sewn for all they're worth. And Nev says, it staggers me, frankly. Oz, of all people, have said some very harsh things about him in the past. We all have. Just shows you how mistaken you can be. And anyway, so they cut to the timber store, and Oz and Barry and Moxie
sticking the videos in.
Well, they've made the coffin, and there's clearly a false bottom in the bottom of the coffin. And Oz is like praising himself. He's like, what a great idea, eh? And Barry's like, are you sure this will work? I said, of course it'll work. It's a golden opportunity. And Moxie says, how much did you bung the chippies? And he says, you never mind how much I bung the chippies, just keep an eye out. And he says, and then Barry's like, I don't feel bad about it. It just feels wrong somehow. I have to admit, I have grave misgivings. Moxie's like, Barry, man, He's like, sorry, he goes, I know what, Moxie says, I know what he means though. There's something sacrilegious about it, tampering with the dead. And Oz says, we're not tampering, man. Just look at it this way. Headley's going home, isn't he? And he's just taking some stuff across for us on his way. Or he says, all the same, Oz, I've got this sense of doom, you know. He says, as if you die, retribution. He says, as if dire retribution will inevitably follow. And so Barry's, you know, given a bit of, you know, foreshadowing about the, you know, about how the plan's going to end up. And Oz says, look, you know, we're kind of back down now, man. He says, you know, we've come this far. All our cash is tied up in this, in case you'd forgot. I mean, we didn't get into this lot. We didn't get this lot on sale or return, you know. And Moxie says, you know, he's right there, Barry. We need to see this through. And Oz says, we've only got room for one more. What's it going to be then? Convent Nights or the Wicked Ways of Wonder? You know, very, very English titles for German videos. And Barry and Moxie each choose the different title. They've both got an opinion on their favourite. You know, so as much as Barry's like, oh, I'm not interested, he knows which one he wants. So again, Oz, the next stage of the plan, Oz is in the bar with his mate, the lorry driver. And he says, all I need, and the lorry driver says, you know, all I need is Hassel at Customs, anything irregular, and they're down on me like a ton of bricks. And Oz says, look, there's nothing irregular about it. It's all legal and above board. The British consul himself is going to be there, give it a proper stamp, paperwork, documentation. Look, all you got to do is find a bit of room in your lorry, find a bit of room in the back of your wagon. And he's like, I don't know, the company wouldn't like it. And he says, you don't have to tell me. You don't have to tell the company, man. And he says, look, he says, I'm going to meet you in London. I'll take care of everything from there. I'll handle everything, and I'll bung you 50 quid for your expenses, which is, you know, about a day's pay for these lads. Yeah. And the lorry driver said, if you can guarantee I won't get delayed, of course, with this job, time is money. And he's clearly hanging out. You know, he's clearly sort of haggling for a better deal. And Oz, you know, tries to lay the guilt trip. He says, you know, I know what you mean. He says, I would have meant a lot to the old fella, you know, to be planted on British soil. The cost of the airfare's crippling, you know. And then he pauses and he just goes, 75 quid? And he says, yeah, all right, Oz. He says, that's more like it, Bernie. And then he says, 2 bottles here, Adolf.
Adolf, yeah.
And then the lorry driver says, what I can't understand is why anybody would want to come on holiday here in the first place. And then Oz has clearly been lying to the lorry driver. He says, well, he always went his own way, you know, did me granddad. So obviously Oz has told this fella it's his granddad. So they're back in the hut. And Dennis, you know, he says, let me get this, see if I've got this straight. Your mate Bernie's willing to take this coffin all the way to London for nothing. And Oz says, well, I never said for nothing. I had to bung him 100 quid.
100, yeah.
Now, again, it says in IMDb under goofs.
Yeah, I read that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it says under goofs. It says that Oz paid him 75 quid and then he asked for 100 quid back from the kitty. And they put that down as a goof. I'm like, what? The thought never crossed your mind that Oz is a lying prick that's trying to run Jack an extra 25 quid, which he clearly is. So he says, I had to bung him 100 quid. He says, but I'll get that back out of the whip round money.
Yeah.
And he says, Nev says, where does he pick it up from? And Oz explains, he says, the undertaker. See, it means it is a couple of yous. You'll have to take the coffin down there. They'll stick the body in it. Then you'll have to pay him, right? He says, should be enough money left at the whip round for that. He says, then we made Bernie, says he'll pick it up at about 4 o'clock. And Bomber says, so what does Bernie do when he gets back to London? Somehow the body's got to end up in Hemel Hempstead. And Wayne straight away puts his foot down. He says, don't begin none of your Hemel Hempstead, son. He says, I'm leaving tonight. I'm perfectly prepared to whip round there tomorrow lunchtime, but Saturday is the day of the wedding. And Oz, miraculously helpful Oz, he says, well, I might be able to help you. He says, and Neville's like, how come? He says, well, it just so happens I've got to go back this weekend. And Dennis is like, what's up? Like, he says, well, it's me, and Oz, like, you can just see the lies. I mean, it's a great bit of acting by Jimmy Neal here. You know, because you can tell by the tone of voice that he's lying. He says, It's me granda. He's on death's door. Marjorie wrote and told us. And Dennis said, you never mentioned this before. And he says, well, so it was a bit personal. Like, Dennis, he's in this London hospital and he's been asking for us. And Neville's like, what's he doing down London? So he was on his holidays, took queer apparently. So I thought, the least I could do would be to go over, And Bomber says, kill 2 birds with 1 stone, you mean? He says, well, I hope not, Bomber. And Neville, again, falling for his act, hook, line and sinker. He's like, well, I don't know what to say, Oz. And Oz is like, bashful. He says, it's nothing, man. Wayne, you can go tomorrow to see the old girl. Tell her she hasn't got a thing to worry about. She'll have a long-lost brother back with her on Saturday. And Wayne's like, signed, sealed and delivered, so to speak. And Neville, he's amazed. He says, you could go to all this bother for a bloke you don't even know. I think that's great, actually. And Dennis says, well, why don't you go back with Wayne tonight? He says, no, I'll do another day's work, Dennis, Go back tomorrow. He says, hey, Wayne, maybe we could get back together, though. You fancy it? And he says, I suppose so. He says, you got me phone number, ain't you? He says, he says, well, give us a bell then. He says, I will do. So I'll be off then. And Neville says, good luck, Wayne, tomorrow. And he says, break the news to her gently. And he says, you know me, mate, I'm the soul of tact, ain't I? He says, all those with brothers still alive in Germany, take 1 pace forward. Fast, Mrs. Hilton. So that's how he thinks he's going to bring. He says, I'll see you later, adios. So they cut to the bar and Barry and Moxie, and he's like, I'm sorry, Mox, this whole enterprise has already set me back quite a bit, all right? Now Oz wants us to chip in for his bloody airfare. Why can't he hitch a ride with his mate Bernie? And he says, don't be so soft, Barry. Oz can't do that. He knows what's in the coffin. First rule of smuggling, that. Always get someone to take the stuff through who doesn't know they've got it. And Barry says, oh, I see. That never occurred to me, that wouldn't. Now, cast your mind forward. There's a definitive foreshadow here. Because in Series 3, when they fly to Arizona,
right,
who gets put in prison for smuggling?
Oh, I can't remember that one.
Barry. So do you remember Barry's the Russian hides a kilo of cocaine in the plane?
Oh, right. Yeah,
and when it lands in America, Barry gets arrested for smuggling the
That's
cocaine.
It. Yeah.
Didn't know it was there. So, obviously at this point, they definitely don't even know if there's going to be a Series 2, let alone a Series 3, 20 years down the line. However, like I say, this particular point, I think, is very, very poignant in the fact that Barry is, very, 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 very naive to the ways of smuggling. And it comes back to bite him on the arse many, many years later. And Moxie just says, well, you've led a very sheltered life, haven't you, Barry? And anyway, so Oz brings the beers over. And Barry's whinging about money. He says, it's going to leave me very short this month. Most of my whack goes directly to my golden egg account in the building society. For one point, this is the only point where I think he fails to mention that it's the West Bromwich and District.
Yeah.
And Oz says, look, Barry, man, he says, I'm going to be back on Sunday. You'll get your money back then with interest. And Moxie says, you can get rid of it that quick. And he says, I know this bloke up north. And Barry's like, a lot of blokes you do, Oz. And he says, look, man, Barry, come on. Because we're all set, man. So they cut back to the hut and it's nighttime and everyone's asleep and the coffin is on the table. Now, bearing in mind, it's an empty wooden box. Yeah, that's it. And Barry is terrified.
Wide-eyed.
Like wide-eyed, with his blanket tucked up around his chin. And Barry is wide awake and definitely cannot sleep. And so Wayne goes to next to cuts and Wayne's back in England. He's in Hemel Hempstead. This is obviously not Hemel Hempstead. It is in Bushey. And
Hertfordshire.
Yeah. So it is. It's just a residential street in Bushey. And so Wayne knocks on the door, no answer. He goes around the back and there's a fella in the greenhouse and he says, excuse me. And he says, this woman, Mr. Neville Hilton. He says, you must be Mr. Hilton. He says, and he says, yes. And he says, come round here. And he says, is this about the roof, the estimate for the roof? Like, what? He says, we waited enough for it. Waited long enough for it. You're supposed to come last Tuesday and he never turned up. And Mabel stayed in all day and missed the shops. And Wayne says, look, is Mabel in? And he says, she's at the laundrette. So not only can she not afford a phone, she can't afford her own washing machine either. And he says, who are you? He says, my name's Wayne. He says, I'm afraid I brought you and your good lady wife some rather unpleasant news. And he's saying, it's not about the blooming roof, is it? He says, no. He says, it's about Mabel's brother, Headley. He says, Headley, what about him? He says, I'm afraid he died, sir. And he says, I thought he died years
ago.
So, cuts back to Germany. They're loading the coffin on the back of the van. And Moxie's like complaining, it's bloody heavy this, and Barry's like, it's bloody heavy. And I was like, how are you, man, how are you? They're whinging about the weight of the coffin when they've got, I mean, granted the tapes don't weigh that much, but the false bottom, etc. You'd think they'd shut the fuck up, wouldn't you? And Barry's like, mind me fingers. And he's like, just get it on. He says, right, look, I'm off. He says, I'll go to the Undertaker, do the paperwork, and I'm off to the airport. And they said, good luck, Roz, all the best. And Barry's like, you know what? I'm glad to see the back of that coffin, to tell you the truth. And Barry says, I didn't sleep a wink last night. I kept expecting Vincent Price to step out of it. So they cut back to Headley's sister's house and Bob. So Bob is the man that played Bob.
Yeah.
Was a very, very prolific actor back in the day. Did you know that?
Oh, really? I never picked up on him.
So he was called James Ottaway, and he was a very, very famous theatre actor, but he also had 131 credits on IMDb.
Bloody hell.
And his TV career, started in 1937. I didn't even know they had tellies then. And went through to 1998. So his TV career spanned 61 years. It's amazing. Yeah. And he did, the usual stuff, the more modern stuff like The Bill and Casualty and The Detectives and Minder, picking up appearances, Poirot, All Creatures Great and Small, was on an episode of Boone. So back to the old Michael Elphick link there. Was on Grange Hill, Heidi High, Tucker's Luck. But then in the old Emmerdale Farm, he did an episode of Dad's Army. He was in Z Cars, Up Pompeii, and Dixon of Dock
Green. Used to watch that every Saturday night.
Yeah, there you go. So, like I say, a career spanning 61 years and 131 credits on IMDb, as well as a prolific theatre career. So, one of the most prolific actors that we have seen in Auf Wiedersehen Pet. So anyway, Wayne's sitting they're in the gaff, and Wayne comes in with 2 bottles of beer, says, here we are. And Wayne says, thanks, Mr. Hill. He says, call me Bob. And he says, no, he says, I never knew Headley. I wouldn't know him from Adam. He was in Germany when I married Mabel. He never came back, and she never speaks about him. And Wayne says, well, I never knew him myself. He says, it was my mates that met him. And he says, I brought this, and he gets the tin out. Says, some of his bits and pieces, there's nothing of value, except sentiment. Anyway, so they hear the door, and he says, that'll be the wife. He says, put your glass onto that match. She doesn't like stains on the mahogany.
He soon hides the beard, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's it. He says, all right. So, and Mabel comes in. He says, hello, love, we've got visitors. And she says, oh, yes, I'll just get me things off. And he says, hello, Mrs. Hilton, my name's Wayne. And Bob says he comes from Germany. And she goes, oh, it's not about the roof then. He says, Bob says he knew Headley. And she goes, Headley? And she says, yeah. He says, yeah. Wayne says, some of my mates met him in hospital. And Bob just says, he's dead, Mabel. And like, she's fairly stoic to this news, doesn't really react. Takes her coat off and he says, put the kettle on, dear. And she gives Bob a coat. And Bob says, yes. And like you say, he grabs his beer and he sort of, walks out the room with it by his side. I'm assuming he's trying to hide it from the wife. And Wayne just says, look, I'm sorry, but it was quite peaceful. And she says, sit down, young man. And he says, right, thanks. And he sits down again. And she says, how did you know Headley? He says, well, look, I didn't, not directly. See, my mates did. Apparently, he was quite a character from all accounts. Anyhow, just before he snuffed...
passed on. Yeah.
like he was showing the lads these things, photos and that, and this is how we got your address. He says, well, me and my mates, we thought he'd like to be buried here in England. And she says, but he died in Germany. Shouldn't he be buried in Germany? And Wayne says, but he's your brother, isn't he? And her attitude switches. And she becomes, fairly aggressive in her tone. And she says, that young man is my misfortune. Headley was a wicked
man. Yeah.
He left a wife here in 1943, met up with some German girl, and poor Nora's never heard a word since. Not had a penny neither. He always was a wrong'un, and I don't expect times made a farthing's difference. And Wayne's like, hold on, he got turned over by the army, didn't he? I mean, he got cashiered for fraternization. And she tells the truth. She says, they chucked him out, if that's what you mean, but it wasn't for fraternization. It was for selling 2,000 British Army headlamps to them.
Headlamps to Russians.
And Wayne's like, obviously realised, he's like, what? Nah. And she said, he was nothing more than bad news, or Headley. And if you and your friends have got him, you can bloody well
keep him.
And Wayne's like, he's gone, he's travelled all this way, thought he was doing a good turn, and he's been thrown back in his face. So he obviously rings Dennis, and Dennis is like, obviously he passes on the news, and Dennis is like, no, of course, you did the right thing, Wayne, in the circumstances. Well, I mean, especially if she feels about it that way, no, I'll phone the undertakers. No, it'll have not left yet. And so they cut to the site, and Neville says, poor old Headley. And Dennis says, poor old Headley, you're joking, aren't you? He was a right little rascal. He made a right fool of us, right enough. And Bomber says he must have fooled a lot more over the years. And Dennis says he was a little waster, Bomber. Now there was a very famous comedian called, what was it, Bobby something? I should have looked this up. My mother will be shouting, when my mother watches this, she'll be shouting and screaming.
Yeah.
We met him at the snooker when I was a very, very little boy. Bobby something. He was a very famous Geordie comedian.
Yeah.
And his nickname was the Little Waster. I'm sure. And he was called Bobby. I can't remember. Anyway, my mother made me go and get his autograph when I was a kid. And anyway, so that was that was like a Geordie saying. And Dennis says he was a little waster, Bomber. He wasn't cashiered, court-martialed, man. And Neville says, I still think it's a shame, especially after all the work we put in, especially Oz.
Yeah.
And Dennis thinks, hey, Oz will be at the airport, I'll have to get after him. And he puts his towel down, he starts to run off. Anyway, Bomber says, wait a minute. He says, old Bummer may be on the slow side, but he's given us a lot of thought these last few days. Dennis says, what you getting at? He says, we had some scheme in mind about selling pornographic videos. And Neville's like, porno videos? And then Dennis says, adult, liable to cause offence.
Yeah.
And he says, I know, because I saw them in his locker. And he's like, yeah, so what? He says, well, I know they're not there now because I looked. And he says, I don't want you to think I'm being vindictive just because he mangled my foot. But they're gone, and so is the coffin. And Neville says, the coffin, and the penny drops. And Neville is horrified that he would, and he says, oh, hey, he says, I can't believe that, Bomber. And Dennis just says, can't you, Neville, Big-hearted Oz all of a sudden, sick granddads in London, makes perfect sense to me. So they realise that Oz has hidden the porn videos in the coffin. And Bomber, he says, now look at it this way. If he really has got a sick grandfather, then his trip's worthwhile. But if he's been having us on, he deserves everything he gets. So they cut to England, and Oz is waiting at a truck stop, and his friend Bernie pulls up in the lorry. Now, this truck stop, in the background, that building is now a Chinese restaurant in Watford called the Imperial China. There you go. So if anyone of our listeners or readers, listeners or watchers ever goes to the Imperial China in Watford, you can say that was part of the set, part of the location. So Oz is obviously, his mate Bernie pulls up in the lorry. Oz is happy as a pig in shite. He's jumping up and down, shouting and screaming, "Get in!" And he says, "Right on time, Bernie. No bother at the customs." And Bernie says, "No, none at all." He says, "Great, man. What did I tell you?" And he says, "Just one snag, Oz." He says, "I don't know all of the details, but there was a last-minute change of plan." Oz is like, "Eh?" So the next thing you see is Oz is walking through the graveyard of the church. It's Wayne's cousin's wedding, and the photographs are being taken. Wayne's in a suit. He's got his hair brushed down, and he's trying to look like a semi-respectable member of society. And they're all having their pictures taken. And Oz is hiding behind a gravestone. And he says, "Wayne, man, come here, man, come here." And Wayne's like, "What the fuck?" Like, he's like, "What's he doing here?" So Wayne, steps out of the wedding picture lineup, and he walks over and he says, "What are you doing here?" And again, this is in Bushy. It's St. James's Church in. And Wayne says, "What are you doing here?" He says, "Never mind that." He says, "What's happened to Headley?" And Wayne breaks the news. He says, "She didn't want to know. Hated the sight of him. But it's all right. I rung the lads." Oz says, "What happened to the body?" He says, "Don't worry. It's been cremated." And then the church bells go off. And Oz realizes what's happened. So the coffin and Headley being cremated, his porn videos have gone up in smoke. And Oz breaks down. He says, "What? No, no, no." And he realizes it's his and Barry and Moxie's money has gone up in smoke. Actually, not only metaphorically, but also actually gone up in smoke. And Wayne is, taken aback. Wayne obviously still doesn't read. Wayne's not privy to the information the other lads are. And he says, "I never thought you'd take it that
badly."
And Oz wails loudly, sitting on a gravestone, wailing loudly for the dearly departed, well, not Headley, but the dearly departed videos. And that is it. That is the end of the episode. So, like I say, what an absolutely fantastic episode. Again, one of the ones that I'd never seen a lot of, and was very, very happy to be able to break it down. So the credits, obviously Headley got a credit, as we said, not very much. Mabel, his daughter, and Bob Hilton, Mabel's husband, was the one who was a prolific actor. As usual, Herr Ulrich. Now, the credit was Jürgen. Now, I'm assuming Jürgen was the porn king. That was, just the penny dropped when we were actually doing the episode there. The lorry driver, German sister, German nurse, second German nurse, and the barman. So that was it for episode 10. So if you have any feedback with regards to episode 10, or you'd like to let us know anything, or you think there's anything that we got wrong, please do drop us an email on Auf Wiedersehen Again @gmail.com. That's Auf Wiedersehen Again @gmail.com. Social media handles, please give us a follow. Instagram @Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. Twitter @Auf Again. Please do follow and like and share the Facebook page of Wiedersehen Again Podcast. And please do subscribe to the YouTube channel of Wiedersehen Again Podcast and click that bell, and that will alert you to any new episodes. If you are listening on audio, we are available on all audio platforms, all good podcast platforms, Spotify, iTunes, Anchor, Google, Breaker, and many, many more. Remember, new episodes are released every Friday at 10 a.m. So please do like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And the theme music is written and composed by the guitar man, Lee Dosky. And remember, our sponsor is Top Gun Tattooing of number 12, the Harris Arcade in Reading, at topguntattoo.co.uk, or 189 968 667, and you can get a 20% discount off any tattoo by speaking to Zach and quoting the code Hadaway and Shiteman. And remember, a free tattoo for all of our listeners from Top Gun Tattooing. Terms and conditions apply. The Neville and Lottie tattoo. So if you get yourself a Neville and Lottie tattoo, we will pay for it. Absolutely free of charge. And don't forget, the current giveaway that we have is the Jimmy Nail book. And that is the giveaway on the social medias. So on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, go to those platforms, click follow, click like to the post, tag 3 of your friends in the post, and share that post. Share it on Facebook, retweet it on Twitter, and or share it to your story on Instagram. And that is our current giveaway. So that is it for this week, George.
Yeah.
So absolutely fantastic episode as usual. And we will be back next week with one of my favorite episodes.
Yeah, one of mine as well, The Lovers.
The Lovers. So Oz puts his German xenophobia to one side and gets it. Yes, we are very much looking forward.
Yeah, some good lines from Oz in this one.
But until that, George.
Yeah.
Until next week.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen Pet.
Oh, yeah, man. All out of options, nothing to choose. I've been out on Netflix, I'm sick of the news. I'd sign up to Sky, but I don't want to pay. I've been on furlough since May. Now I'll go and listen to a Cockney attitude.